Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Prof Talk Pod. My name is Becky, and I'm here with my colleague, friend, and co-host, Galen, whose last name I still double check in my head every time before I say it, and have for 14 years now, however long we've known each other.
It hasn't been quite 14 years, but
No, it feels like it.
yes. No, but thank you. I don't have to check the pronunciation of your name, but that's just because I messed it up enough times the first couple of years that it's just ingrained in my head at this point.
It is one of those things when I'm reading the transcripts of our podcast, and it always wants to spell your name Klay. It's like,
Yeah.
that does not even sound like the way I say it. So then it's in my head now.
Yeah, AI has never done a great job with either of my names, first name or last name, which is fine because regular people don't either. This is how we know that AI is modeled on humanity, because nobody gets either of them right, which is fine. I've kind of given up caring at this point. I'm not going to pull a Kelvin Sampson and chide someone for mispronouncing it, but yeah, that's where we are.
Well, it's funny that we should mention AI up our names, because today's topic is actually going to talk about generative bit different than we have in the past on the show. We've talked a little bit about AI policy and how to maybe combat's not the right word, but how to think about using AI in the classroom and, university-wide policies. But we haven't talked a lot about how faculty can use it to improve their teaching. And this is one of those topics that I think when I talk with my colleagues and friends in the space, everybody's a little bit hesitant to say if slash how they're using it in their work because of potential policies they have in their classroom. And it's one of those, do as I say, not as I do moments. And so it seems like there's a little bit of trepidation to talk about the ways that it can actually help us be better teachers. And for me, it's something that I've really found as a department of one right now has helped me really think through assignments and get better. Things I used to, stop by my colleague's office and ask about my sport marketing assignment. I don't have a colleague office next to me right now, hopefully soon, but not right now. And so I've found ChatGPT, especially, to be a good maybe partner in talking through some crazy ideas that I sometimes have for either big assignments in classes or for individual, in class activity type assignments in classes. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about ways that faculty can just get started using generative AI to improve what they do as a teacher. And I don't know if you've explored that yet a lot, Galen, or not, but would love to hear just maybe some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think first, I've noticed amongst certain faculty colleagues that there is a hesitancy to use generative AI it kind of reminds me of how we approached Wikipedia 20 years ago. I couldn't possibly use this because it's not accurate. And it's like, well, you're missing the point to some degree, as if you're using it to give you like a blow for blow within an assignment. Yes, there'll be things that won't be 100% accurate, but as an idea generator, I think it's good. And I also think there's some trepidation there amongst people, because unfortunately, what you get is this situation where I think faculty feel like if they start using not all, but some faculty feel like if they start using generative AI, that they're admitting that they may not know everything about the topical area, which is not a good way to be as far as I'm concerned. I really think, I always look at it and I'm not creating a lot of assignments right now because I'm not in the classroom right now because of all my administrative duties. But, I've talked with my wife, who uses it to help come up with ideas for projects, come up with ideas for case studies, things that you might not be completely conscious of, because what flaws generative AI has, I think where it overcomes some of those flaws, is how much information it has access to and how it really does seem to pull really good examples based upon the prompts that you give if you're giving good prompts. So I think all of those things mixed together, you've got some hubris, you've got some Ludditism, you've got some hesitancy because they don't know how to use the tools or don't know how to use the prompts. And as you said, you've got some hesitancy among faculty because how could I tell my students not to use generative AI, but then use it myself? But I think it's like anything else, as we've talked about, it's a tool. And if you know the basics of how to use it, and hopefully this is where this podcast helps people learn those tools a little bit, then it becomes another club in the bag that you can pull out when you're putting assignments together to freshen things up. And I think that that's important, particularly with today's classes.
Well, if I go back and think about too, when I started teaching, obviously I was, barely over 30 and hadn't been a university professor before. I'd been a graduate teaching assistant, and all I'd really seen or known about teaching, I was lucky enough at KU, I took a certificate in college teaching, but that didn't sit down and tell you all of the possible assignments that you could ever create. So usually we default to being taught the way that we were taught and using the same assignments that we liked as a student. And sometimes that really limits our scope. And so when I started teaching, where I came up with ideas was Google. I would Google ideas for sport marketing semester long assignments. And what generative AI does is take the hours it would spend me to click on links and read through what were often keyword stuffed blogs from, random websites, and it really distills that information much more quickly so that I can take a 3 hour of Google research into a 15-minute reading a summary from ChatGPT and becomes a conversation. Oh, I really like this idea, but I know I want to add a multimedia element. Tell me how this thing that you gave me for an idea could potentially evolve into multimedia. Or I have this idea for how to evolve this into multimedia. What problems do you see with that? Like, it becomes a conversation partner and makes that process, that initial research process, a lot shorter. And like you said, it has access to so much information to generate its outputs that it would just take me so much longer to do that research on my own.
Yeah, it's really helpful, I think, as you mentioned, for younger faculty or adjuncts who are trying to come up with a corpus of knowledge that they can pass on in the classroom, but also understanding the best ways of applying that. And in many cases, the best ways of applying whatever current events or things that are going on in that corner of the world that you're teaching about, because it is very difficult for most people to assimilate all of that knowledge and to be able to leverage it in an effective way. So my whole thing on it is a lot of the hesitancy that I'll see from faculty in this area is based upon this concept of you're either not supposed to use it for reasons, and I still haven't totally figured out what those reasons are supposed to be, other than a real dedication to the idea that unless you're writing down answers in a blue book, you're not doing it right. But even there, I've always felt like the best teaching, especially in any of our areas, maybe not so much for the life and physical sciences or things like that, but certainly in more social science areas, sports, entertainment, business. There's so many present day or recent examples, and you may even be aware of a story, but not be aware of the facets or the aspects of that story that would correlate to the lessons that you're trying to get across. And I've found many, many times it's pulled it in. I did an example, or I did a test of this. I was completing a book chapter recently for a project that you and I were both involved in. And, I was kind of screwing around. I hate writing those. I hate writing the insets. I think they like the little like profile pieces that all textbook manufacturers demand that you put in every chapter. I'm like, do people read these? Uh, you've had the same thought, even if you won't admit it on air. But but I always struggle because it always feels like I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over again. So what I did was like, well, here's the prompt, and I wrote in like, well, here's what we're looking for. And it spat out a really good example that was factually accurate. I think this was about social media utilization within sports marketing, and it spat out all this about LeBron James and the way LeBron James has utilized social media. And I was like, this is actually really good. Now I wasn't going to use it or turn it in necessarily, but it gave me a concept or an idea about what I might do. And I think that that's a really valuable thing to use in the classroom, because even if you already know generally what your assignment is going to be, what I always recommend is, okay, here's the assignment prompt originally, and here's what I thought we would be doing with this topic. Let me see if the computer can spit up another couple of examples that I could apply to that area. And I think that that ends up being really effective, because it really creates a a new body of knowledge that you don't have to constantly update yourself on all the time, but that you can go in and reach out to and have have it say, here's how this would apply to the lessons you're trying to get across.
Well, and that's a really good example. It's always a time thing, right? I have had this idea for in my sports analytics class, an assignment, a case study using March Madness for years. But, for the previous 3 years, I was teaching 6, 7, 8 classes a semester
Mhm.
across 4 or 5 universities. And so the time to ideate was pretty limited. And this year I was like, you know what? Let me just try because I have it sketched out in my brain, like what I think could work, but I just don't have time to write it in enough detail to actually give it to a student. So I listed my idea in ChatGPT and I said, here's an example of how I usually write my rubrics. Here's an example of how I usually write my case study assignments. Can you help me organize this idea in a way that will work for students across the weeks of the tournament? And it came out with exactly what my brain was thinking, but I wasn't able to put into words in a very, specific detailed way for an assignment. And I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to see how it shakes out because, it's not as simple as if I want to use this in sport analytics, just have students create a bracket and see who wins. We have to find a way to integrate the analytics piece by having them, justify using metrics and data, the teams they chose. And that piece was something that I just hadn't been able to flesh out in enough detail. And I think it's that time element too. Like sometimes when we're in the middle of a semester in some current event, like you said, some current event happens, we know there's a connection with our content, but we can't see it enough to integrate it in the classroom right now. Sometimes we miss the moment and it's gone. Whereas if you put that idea into ChatGPT, it might help you solidify those connections in a way that you use it in the classroom, and then we know that students, if we are being relevant and sharing relevant current content, they're going to be more engaged with it. If I give them a case study from 7 years ago,
Yeah.
they'll be like, "Cool, but this is history, like, it's not useful, but it's harder for them to connect to," and they might not even been paying attention to the influencer space or the sports space or, politics 7 years ago, but if you can connect it to now, that's really helpful, but sometimes we don't because we just don't have time.
Right. Well, and I think even more so in this environment, like a lot of the structure through which teaching has occurred at the college level, particularly at this level, it's all based around textbooks. And the textbooks get written in a very irregular pattern where you'll get updates maybe every 4, 5, 6 years. And I think, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. Like there's sometimes not the requisite level of effort put in to creating pertinent and topical and recent examples that apply the material, because there's already something in the book or there's already something in the online resources, but it's still not necessarily a good example because it's out of date. And this is where, if you are somewhat interested as a student, you've just like caught a story here or there about like sports analytics, for example. Like if we're still talking about, the Boston Red Sox starting a sports analytics department in the mid 2000s, well, that's not really something that is going to resonate that much with students now. You want to use something a lot more recent. You want to use, yeah, I did a whole thing this morning, a whole podcast about how all the analytics for college basketball shot through the roof this year. And it's clear that there's a concerted effort by a lot of coaches to really focus on offensive and defensive efficiency, which are two main metrics of this. Well, that's a very now thing. Like I wouldn't have known that if I'd been looking in the textbook, even if it was talking about like sprawl ball from 10 years ago in the NBA and how that's affecting things. So my point is like you've got to take all those things into account, and being able to lean on something like ChatGPT, even for something that has nothing to do with sports. If you like current, like again, my wife teaches a business, like a law for or business for law students class, where it's like here are issues in business that are pertinent and important that people training to be lawyers should know. Well, there's a lot of different things you could go with there, but in terms of the specific things that are in the textbook, let's take what it's asking for, but then plug it in, find more recent examples. That way, if someone's searching for it, they might get some recent hits where they can learn about the context around it, which I think ends up creating a lot of good ancillary learning experiences that help you to better connect the material that's being taught in the classroom to the things that students are going to encounter in the wild, so to speak.
Well, and one of the benefits of generative AI that I think we don't talk about because people really don't want to talk about benefits in higher ed of generative AI very often, is that we all have expertise, right? That's actually when I think the tool is the most powerful because when you know something about a topic, I can put in, you give me 20 ideas for an assignment for branding, marketing, and PR and professional performance. And I can look at that list and evaluate what is topical, relevant, current, because that's my field, that's my industry. If I did that for, I don't know, actuarial science, I could not evaluate that, right? So we sometimes are like, oh, we're leaning too much on it. Shouldn't we know because we have the expertise? But actually, it's more helpful when you have the expertise because it's saving you the time and then you use your expertise and knowledge to evaluate the output, which is the same thing, I tell students, if you create a marketing plan with generative AI, it's going to be average because you're not going to know what is good and bad and what you should keep or not. If I do it, it's probably going to be even better than if I'd done it completely on my own because I have expertise. So we can use that to our advantage as teachers to create assignments that are more engaging, more connected, that we're not doing simply because we don't have time, energy, or maybe our thoughts can't organize fast enough to make it happen for our classes.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I mean, there's so many elements to this that to me it's like, what are you trying to get across in the class? Which I think we've talked about in several different areas. And how do you connect things that are going to be important to students, whether they know about it or not? Either it's things students are aware of, but maybe don't understand the context of, or either it's things that they should be aware of, but also don't understand the context of. So there's layers to this. And again, I just don't think taking a one size fits all approach helps when you're looking at what a lot of it, I think to some degree also, Becky, and maybe this is where the show notes can help with this. It's like, I don't even know if people are necessarily familiar with what the tools can do. What are even the basic, where are the tools?
Yeah.
What types of tools are there at your disposal? What kinds of things have they done? I think a lot of it is more, there's some modeling that needs to be done with faculty about what is possible, because I many people who are engaged in this space as instructors and professors may just not even be aware at this point, because going back to something we've talked about before with social media, if it's not pertinent to you as an individual, professionally or personally, it's not going to show up in your work. That doesn't mean it's not important. It just means you're not going to have any incentive to integrate it into what you're doing.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is in the show notes, I'm going to put some resources to give you ideas, but also talk about some of the tools that, I mean, here's the thing, and maybe this is a latter podcast, maybe over the summer, because there are so many tools out there. It's almost overwhelming. I mean, there's multiple LLM, large language models. I tend toward GPT because that's where I got started. It has my history, it has my organized folders, but I've used Claude and I've used Gemini, and I've used other, Anthropic and other options, Perplexity, things like that. So I think, maybe that's something that I need to put together so we can talk about that more this summer because that is, it's hard to know where to start when there's so much out there.
Yeah, we almost need to do one of those like LinkedIn learning sessions where we just highlight generative AI for teaching and what sorts of things are even there in the first place. Because again, unless you're already using it or if it's in your area, I could see a lot of faculty members across a lot of different areas. All you hear about generative AI is bad things if you're in
Mhm.
education spaces. Like I've seen 40 emails come down from our university about how to deal with generative AI in the classroom, and it's always based around how to catch students who are cheating. It's never how to use generative AI effectively. I think maybe there's been one email on that, and that comes from the teaching and learning group, which I would estimate 90% of faculty delete those emails without even opening them.
Yeah, I would say that's probably likely. So I'm putting on that in the parking lot because it's a great idea. And, it's one of those things. This is just a little bit of an aside before we'll talk about a couple more ways that it might help you with assignments. It's probably likely that most of the faculty who might be listening to this have generative AI working in some of the tools they're already using and you're not even aware of it. And
Mm,
that is going to be more and more the case as, the technology evolves. I foresee a world where it is just running in the background and we aren't even thinking about it because that's the way we're used to it. Like when you write an email in Gmail, it suggests potential finishes of your sentence. That's coming from predictive modeling, right?
yeah,
So and that existed before
yeah.
ChatGPT had blown up in the world. So I do think there's a lot of tools that we all use. Most of us have been using Grammarly and suggesting Grammarly to our students for a long time. Grammarly is even better than it was
Hmm.
now, but those things already were using this type of technology. So that's an aside to keep in the back of your mind. You can resist and resist and resist, but at some point it's just going to be integrated into the things that you do. So,
And I will say, and I think you touched on a really important point. Even if you're using one tool, consider trying some other tools and consider test driving them and use the same prompt but do it in 4 or 5 different places and see what you can come up with. And I think you'll find, and this is the other aspect is, again, I feel like we're doing social media again 15 years later, but don't assume when you go and you get a particular set of responses or you see that there's a particular set of options available with whatever generative AI model you're using, that will be the same 6 months from now, because these things add features, they add more modeling, they add more background, they get better and better over time. And so you might visit one and it might not have what you're looking for, but then 6 months later it not only has what you're looking for, it's got it in spades. Honestly, we're using that right now. We're recording our podcast via this service called StreamYard, and I was going to tell you after we got done with the podcast, but I'll tell you now, this is actually not me. I'm actually an AI model that StreamYard has created. No, I'm kidding. What I was going to tell you is StreamYard now has a thing. After we finish this podcast, I'm going to hit the end record button, and then it will not only upload for me the file of the podcast, but it is also going through and clipping out 45 to 60-second clips of that you can upload directly to Instagram or directly to TikTok to help promote the podcast. And it transcribes them right in the app. It switches the video so that we're on top of each other. These are things that weren't in this 6 months ago. And my point is, like, this all rolls out, and then, like, I never got an email. I think I maybe got one email, but I didn't look at it because, who reads email these days? But you go in into the software tool, it's like, wow, this is like 10 times better than it was the last time I used it. So I think it's important for people to remember, like, once you learn something, you have to keep learning it and keep up to speed with it, because you may find what you're looking for that wasn't there 6 months earlier.
and maybe that's a consistent show for us might be talking about some of the tools and the changes and the things that I've updated over courses of months. So hopefully this can be a resource for you all. But I will put some tools, some lists that I found of tools in the show notes to help get started. I want to circle back just to a couple other things that might be useful or that I found useful for generative AI in assignments. And these are more for like those in-class activities or low stakes assignments that you might like to integrate.
Mhm.
And one of my most favorite things to do is when I have an idea that might be slightly crazy, I will put it into generative AI, I will tell it who the students are. So are they seniors, majors in, professional performance or sport management or media or whatever it is. And I will say, I want to do my most favorite one I did a couple weeks ago. I want to do this Play Doh activity where they have to model a product with Play Doh and then they have to pitch it when we were talking about entrepreneurship. And I said, these are seniors in college who, are digital marketing and media majors for the most part. How might they react to this activity? Because in my head, I'm like, this is Play-Doh. Like my 5-year-old plays with Play-Doh. And it gave me a whole list of like, actually, this is a great idea. People think, stuff like that is too kiddie for college students, but it's tactile, it's active. Oftentimes they appreciate, like, I could have Googled that,
Right.
right? I could have. Or I could ask it to pretend to be somebody and give me a perspective that made me feel confident about trying it, and actually it went fantastic. Like, my students loved the activity and their faces lit up when I took Play-Doh out of my teacher bag, which made me feel like a kindergarten teacher, which I also loved too, because it gave me a little bit of passion again for doing things that were a little bit different. So that's another one of my favorite uses of it, is when you get an idea for something like that that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone and you're not sure how it might be received, you can ask it to take on a persona just
Yep.
to kind of give you some feedback as to what this could look like. Now, it might have failed anyway, but at least I went in with some expectations, having asked it to give me some feedback.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. I mean, and you've gone further with it than I have on that front. But it's something, and look, I'll be the first to say I need to be better at taking some different angles on some of these things and getting some ideas back from it. I will be doing more of that as we move forward.
When you're in the classroom again. It's a little easier for me right now because I am teaching new preps,
Yeah.
classes I haven't taught before in a field that is a basically conglomeration of, 10 different fields into one.
Mhm.
So it's easier for me to be doing, random things and needing the help because it's new to me too. So
This is why I'll be coming back and checking on this podcast. So it'll get when I'm back in the classroom, hopefully soon, we'll get some more ideas from that.
that sounds awesome. Well, I could talk more about this, but we already mentioned putting some resources in the show notes. So please make sure you check those. And as always, please reach out if you have questions, if you want ideas, if you run into any issues, you're always welcome to reach out or put in the comments on either YouTube, or you can email Becky at theengagedprofessor.com. And I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And I guess until next time, I hope that you are enjoying, we're getting close to the end of the semester. So I hope you are enjoying the last final push.